The minute you walked in the door, I could see you were a man of distinction.
Hello from Castle Goring, from Nikki and from me. Well, we have rather a full programme, so I'm going to plunge right in, if I may. Okay? Because there's quite a lot of ground to cover, and I really would much rather that we cover it as quickly as possible. First question is from Stephanie Green, who says, Lady C, Happy New Year. Thank you, my dear, and same to you. Thank you for this critique of a very British scandal. I'm in America and was able to access the episodes on YouTube. Fantastic. I hope everyone else who wants to see it realizes that they can access the episodes on YouTube. I was hoping you would address the smoking gun of the scandal, the infamous Polaroid with the Headless Man. Did Margaret ever explain this to you? Based on your analysis and the Duke's dastardliness, I wouldn't be surprised if this photo was a fake. Your thoughts, please. It wasn't a fake. Many of the other photographs that he submitted to the court, claiming to be of her with men, were fakes, bought in San Francisco in 1958 or 59, I forget which one, when they were on a trip just before they got finally separated. But this one was definitely not a fake. Yes, Margaret and I spoke about it. She also told Brian, her son, and Brian and I spoke about it. So both Brian and I knew from Margaret who the Headless Man was. Now, I will say that there are several journalists, some of whom are quite mischievous, who would like to pretend that Margaret would have identified someone else. Well, they have money to make, and I'm not going to deprive them of their right to make money, even if I don't agree with the methods which they use to make money. She's dead, she can't sue, it's their word against what they claim was hers. But let me put it this way. Who would you prefer to believe? A journalist or her son and stepdaughter-in-law? I just make that point for what it's worth. Because it's really very tedious when journalists argue with you and try to tell you that they know more about yourself or your relations, and you know more about yourself and about them. This is something I have had to contend with for nearly 50 years, personally. And it is tedious in the extreme. However, I suppose gutter press journalists will wade in the gutter. Anyway, the point is, I know who the Headless Man was. He was definitely not Duncan Sands. As Margaret pointed out to me, how could it possibly be when Duncan Sands had concertina legs? He'd been involved in a very serious accident. His skin had been taken off the bone and then put back. So it was definitely not Duncan Sands. It was definitely not Douglas Fairbanks Jr. He denied it to friends of mine. She denied it to me. And there was no reason for her to lie. There are many reasons for journalists to invent. It's called money. But there was no reason for her to lie, and I don't believe for a second that she did. Lindsay Spence, in her book The Grit in the Pearl, believed that it was Joe Thomas. Margaret was engaged to Joe Thomas after she was divorced in, I think, 48 and 49. She was engaged to Joe Thomas. It might have been 47 and 48, but anyway, whenever it was long before she knew Ian Campbell, 11th Duke of Argyll. He then married Poppy de Salis, because he was actually engaged to Poppy de Salis when he met Margaret, and then became engaged to Margaret, went to Switzerland to tell Poppy de Salis that he was breaking up with her, finally, which is what gentlemen do. Gentlemen always sever relationships of any significance in person. And he and Poppy de Salis got married, which was devastating for Margaret. Joe Thomas's son ran across some photographs that appeared to be Joe and Margaret. They would have been taken in the 1940s, when Polaroids were first discovered, and it would have been a fun and daring thing to do between an affianced couple. Those are not the same pictures as the Headless Man. The Headless Man, according to Margaret, was Bill Lyons, an American who was a top executive at Pan American and who she wanted to marry. She would have gladly given up being Duchess of Argyll to become Mrs. Bill Lyons. He was married, separated of a sort, kept on going back and forth as his wife kept on threatening to commit suicide. And finally, after several years, the relationship petered out and he definitively went back to his wife. To the best of my knowledge, Margaret had no significant other thereafter. And since I knew her for quite a long time, I also knew people who knew her very well. I would venture to say that Margaret was not the runaround that she was made out to be. Yes, she had a handful of lovers, but not the multitude that Big Ian tried to claim she had. I hope that clears up the mystery, because the mystery couldn't be simpler. There is no mystery. It was Bill Lyons. And anybody who claims to the contrary doesn't know what they're talking about, because surely rational people will realize that the person who was involved would have known rather better than gutter press journalists or other writers who are not gutter press but still got it wrong. The Headless Man was Bill Lyons. She didn't take the secret to the grave. She told me and her son, and we knocked heads together. The pity is, he died a few months ago. Otherwise, I'm sure he would be sitting on this sofa beside me, verifying that Margaret told him as well. I will say, actually, one thing before getting off the subject. Margaret fudged the date that she met Bill lions, because she met him after she was separated from my father-in-law. And she fudged the date that their romance began, because it would not have been sensible to not fudge the date. I just make that point for what it's worth. Michelle wants to know, dear Lady C, thank you so much for your valuable insight into what really happened in the Argyll case. I'm absolutely horrified to hear that Margaret has been credited by the BBC as having written the poison pen letter. This is grossly unfair and a slur on her reputation, and I would even go as far as to call it a malicious lie. I'm also astounded that the Duke was even worse than he has been shown to be. I cannot truly comprehend that an aristocratic British man would knowingly marry his own daughter in the 1960s. Well, in defence of Big Ian, there is a chance it wasn't his daughter, but there is also a chance that it was. So I think we need to keep an open mind on that. To do so is shocking, not keeping an open mind. She means to marry somebody who is possibly your daughter. To do so is shocking, depraved, and utterly repulsive. You are entitled to your opinion, and I am not going to steal your right to voice it. What a disgusting family. They certainly were in that generation, and in my generation, but not in the present generation. You and Margaret have my deepest sympathies. Thank you very much. And well done you for getting out without giving the blighters a penny. Then she has all sorts of symbols, none of which I understand what they mean, except heart. Well, I think I see a doggy as well. But I don't understand what the symbols mean. I'm sorry, I'm not into that sort of thing. But thanks for the good thoughts. And yes, I was very proud of getting out with minimal financial damage. But I have to tell you, it wasn't without giving the blighters a penny. My father insisted that I turn over the furniture in the New York flat, which had been bought with my money, to my ex-husband, because he said he was sick and tired of him ringing up, creating scenes and causing problems and making demands, and he wanted anything for a quiet life. And I told my father, you're making the biggest mistake you could ever make, and I am going to end up having to pay for it. Which sure enough was true. I warned Daddy of the dangers of succumbing to blackmail, but Daddy wouldn't listen. So, believe me, the blighters did get more than a penny. Can I ask what you think of the Tony Blair petition? Is the Queen likely to remove his knighthood if the petition gathers enough signatures? Is there anything else the public can do to encourage her to listen to our views on such an aberration? Has the Queen ever removed a knighthood from an ex-Prime Minister before? Many thanks for all your insight. You really are a national treasure. Then more joyous symbols. I am a long-time subscriber of yours and never get bored of your videos. I especially ignore... Sorry. Sorry, let me start over. I especially enjoy Mickey's snoring. Well, Mickey isn't snoring now, as you can tell. Oh, she just snored. Well, That's a very serious question, and I am afraid I'm going to have to answer it with gravitas as opposed to levity. Jeff Hoon, who was the Defence Secretary at the time, has issued a statement saying that Jonathan Powell, who was Tony Blair's Chief of Staff, ordered him to burn the document that confirmed that, shall we call it the dodgy dossier, was dodgy, and that the evidence being used to take us into the Iraq War was actually, if not concocted, certainly suspected of having been concocted, which it turned out it was. There is a lot of fallout from this that goes back to the supposed suicide of Dr. Kelly, who was the person who blew the whistle on the dodgy dossier, and that there were no weapons of mass destruction. And if you recall, Dr. Kelly is alleged to have committed suicide by draining his blood under a tree, but there was no blood. The whole thing has stunk to high heaven from the very beginning. I was dead against the Iraq War, I have to tell you. I actually felt that President Bush and Prime Minister Blair should have been charged with crimes against humanity and war crimes. I'm sorry if that disappoints some people, but I was outraged because I knew that they were taking us into a war using fabrications, in my opinion, and I said it then and I will say it now, so that they could make a shed load of money for themselves, destroying Iraq, then sending in Halliburton to reconstruct it, which is precisely what they did. And Blair at the time was regarded as Bush's poodle, and people in England who couldn't figure out why Blair was going along with it, when the subject came up, I told them my opinion, which was, in my opinion, it couldn't have been simpler, that Tony Blair knew that he was going to get his reward when he left office, that if he was a tame poodle and backed up Bush, that he would end up making loads of money and having choice positions, which is exactly what happened. That actually doesn't answer the question, which was, what do I think will happen regarding the Blair petition? I would encourage everybody to sign the Blair petition who feels that Tony Blair should not have been awarded the knighthood. I would encourage you to sign the petition, because the Queen can strip someone of a knighthood. Tony Blair has never been given a peerage, which Parliament would have to strip him of, but a knighthood the Queen can strip him of. Now, it's up to you, the public. I'm not saying that you should do it. Each of us has a conscience, and each of us must act as he or she wishes. But I would suggest that if you think that this does not accord with your concept of what is right, that you make the point by signing the petition. Now, this presents a difficulty for the Queen, I have to tell you, and has done all along. And the fact that she has delayed giving Blair any of the rewards that are customarily given to a prime minister upon departure shows that she has done all she could to register her distaste and displeasure. She is the queen of a constitutional monarchy. Every prime minister who has ever served this country, and there is no doubt that Tony Blair served this country, and may I say, served it very well, until he destroyed his legacy by allowing Bush to take him into what was effectively a money-making war, to the destruction of a nation and the people of that nation. The Queen's dilemma is she couldn't delay forever. She had at some point to endow Blair with what are regarded as the rightful rewards of a prime ministership. And he was, except for that disastrous decision, a very good prime minister. He did a lot of good for this country and for the people of this country. We cannot ignore all of the positive things that he did because he made a disastrous mistake. That doesn't mean he shouldn't be made to pay for the error of his ways. The British at the end of the Second World War and the Americans set up the Nuremberg trials. They made sure the Nazis paid. I have always said that Bush and Blair should have been hauled before the Hague. But unless they are charged with crimes, the Queen ultimately has to give the man his just rewards. All prime ministers make mistakes. All prime ministers have mixed legacies. It's not up to the monarch to willy-nilly decide whom she is going to endow with a reward and whom she is going to fail to deny the reward. Do you see the dilemma for the Queen? She has done actually the best thing possible, and there is talk that she has done it before the Prince of Wales accedes to the throne. So she is being honourable enough to make sure she doesn't hand on dirty linen to the next generation, and that she will deal with the situation as it arises, which shows how courageous she is. If ever there was any doubt in anybody's mind that we are truly fortunate to have the wonderful head of state that we do, I think this sort of behaviour should remove doubt. But she really has had no choice ultimately if she was going to be a responsible monarch, a responsible mother, and a responsible human being. At some point, she had to grit her teeth and do what basically she didn't want to do, which is honour somebody who she clearly has not wanted to honour for the last 14 years. Ariana Bowes says, Lady C, thank you for your hard work with this channel. I'm glad you appreciate it. My question is, when the Queen dies, is there something we the people can do to prevent Prince Charles from bringing the Sussexes back as working royals, if he is so inclined? Oh my goodness me. Well, Ariana Bowes, I'm sorry, but the answer is a very mixed one. It's both yes and no. He can deprive them of the right to do official duties, and that will curtail their activities significantly. But he is a father, he loves his son. Anybody who's basically a decent person wants harmony in his family as opposed to conflict. There are also Harry's human rights to consider. He, as a human being, is allowed to make a mistake and to be, shall we say, forgiven, as long as he is apologetic and as long as he makes amends. Of course, the amends he would want to make and Meghan would want to make if they're still together, which they will be at that point, I suspect, is to do official duties. Not an easy situation. You know, the Prince of Wales loves his sons, and I don't envy the position that he's in. I know people who are in very similar positions. Some I know rather too well for comfort. And it's a very difficult situation how you cope with recalcitrant children. However, Charles needs to understand what he's really dealing with. And if he does, good. If he doesn't, he's going to make an ungodly mess of the whole thing. And it will rebound adversely upon him and make him look wet, weak, and stupid. But let us see what happens, because there are evidently hopes, as I have said some time ago, that Harry and Meghan can be reined in, and there have been moves to try to get them to be reined in. And to those of you who don't know it, Harry and Meghan, for all the talk of their outstanding success in Hollywood, have been huge flops in reality. But that is for another time. Resident of Sussex says, what do you make of the revelation that Meghan received only £1 damages for the Mail on Sunday's invasion of her privacy? I don't know how many of you remember the writer Leon Uris. He wrote Exodus. Then he wrote a book called QBVII, Queen's Bench 7. what happened to Leon Uris and the outcome of that trial is very relevant as to what has happened in this instance. I will tell you about the Leon Uris case first, and then I will show you the parallels. There's no way of dressing it up. By awarding £1 damages, or agreeing, actually, it wasn't an award, it was an agreement, by Meghan's side agreeing to £1 damages, if the Mail on Sunday made a payment into court, which is standard procedure in libel actions and in all sorts of defamation actions, copyright actions. So in other words, the sort of actions, because it was on two grounds, privacy and copyright. If they made a payment into court that exceeded £1 damages, that means that Meghan is liable for every single penny of their costs as well as her costs for the privacy part of the action. Because it was a settlement, you can bank on it that both sides will have hunkered down and try to get the best deal for themselves. But £1 agreed damages tells anybody in the know that by agreeing to that amount, Meghan and her lawyers have admitted that having succeeded in the case, they will have lost on costs as well as in fact. Because when damages are derisory, what it means is that the newspaper spoke the truth, and the truth, despite being defamatory, was not damaging to the litigant. Let me go back to the Leon Uris case. Leon Uris wrote a book called QBVII, which was about an eminent doctor called Dr. Sir Adam Kelno, who was a doctor who worked on patients. He was a prisoner in Jadwiga, which was one of the concentration camps in Poland. And he worked in the hospital, which indeed most doctors did work in. Prisoner doctors would have worked in. It is based on a true story, the case of Dr. Władysław Dering, who was a Polish doctor at Auschwitz. When Uris wrote his book, Exodus, which was a huge bestseller about the Jews going really back to Palestine, to the Promised Land, he named various doctors at Auschwitz who used to perform experimental surgery and sterilizations on the camp prisoners. Dr. Daring, who had come to Britain in after the war, I think in about 46 or 47, but anyway, he was detained and then he was examined and released because of insufficient evidence, went to Africa, did sterling work in Africa, came back to Britain and discovered that Leon Uris had named him in Exodus as one of the doctors, and indeed he was one of the doctors. Well, he sued Leon Uris, he sued the British publishers, William Kimber and Company, and he sued the printers. The printers settled for £500 and an apology, but Leon Uris and Kimber and Co. refused to settle. The matter was heard in April and May 1964 in front of Mr. Justice Frederick Lawton. He was the presiding judge. There was a jury. After the jury had heard all of the evidence, chief of which, it has to be said, was the evidence of a French psychiatrist who was also a prisoner and a doctor at Auschwitz, along with Dr. Daring. She had been approached to take part in this experimental surgery and she had refused. One of the planks of Dr. Daring's defense was that if he didn't go along with it, he would be killed and exterminated. Nowadays, of course, everybody who's involved with a trial, especially when they stand a chance of gaining a whole load of money, will say, oh, if I didn't go along with it, I was terrified. They were rich and grand and they were going to have me killed. That is no new defense. That's an old defense. And it fortunately didn't wash with Mr. Justice Lawton, the jury, because Adelaide Hautval, the French psychiatrist, gave evidence. And she made it absolutely clear that when she was approached, she point blank refused to go along with it and said she wasn't doing it, and nothing happened to her. She continued doing work in the camp hospital. She continued ministering to the concentration camp inmates. She was even in 1965 named by the Israeli state righteous amongst the nations. And Sir Frederick Lawton said of her, perhaps that she was one of the most impressive and courageous women who had ever given evidence in the courts of this country. Well, that was a big clue to the jury that Dr. Daring was either a coward or an opportunist. And they found in his favour, because he had been defamed, and they awarded him a halfpenny damages, because by 1965 farthings were no longer in circulation, and the halfpenny, half a penny to those who don't know what it is, was the lowest denomination financially, and they awarded him a halfpenny damages. Well, the other side had paid £2 into court. So Dr. Daring won his case but lost, because he was liable for all his costs and all the costs of the other side as well. I suspect you see the parallels between the two cases. I will tell you what I think has happened. The Mail on Sunday thought they have such a strong negotiating position, and Meghan has such a weakened negotiating position, that they didn't need to take this to appeal further, that they had achieved their objective, which they have achieved. They have vindicated Thomas Markle utterly, and Meghan has been exposed as the treacherous, abusive, manipulative, in my not so humble opinion, reprehensible daughter that she is, right up there with Goneril, Regan, and any other, shall we say, figure literarily that one would care to grab out of the air. And you can bank on it. Meghan has paid dearly for this. Dearly. The mere fact that damages were agreed at £1 means that there is no way that the Mail on Sunday have carried the can for all of their costs and all of Meghan's costs. Meghan has carried the can for some of her costs and presumably some of their costs as well. You know, in life, it's always helpful to know what to look for. And unfortunate for poor Megsy baby, I know my way around the law well enough to know that for all her posturing, she has tanked. And quite frankly, I'm delighted she has, because I completely disapprove of what she tried to do to her father. I think it is beyond reprehensible. M. Spares says, "Thank you for the unique and honest perspective you bring to history and history in the making. Have you read Traitor King by Andrew Loney? If so, what is your take on it? Do you see parallels between the Duke of Windsor and Harry and their marriages? Do you think Harry is doomed to the same sad and lonely fate as his uncle?" Well, in case you don't know, I knew the Duke of Windsor slightly, and I knew the Duchess of Windsor slightly, and I knew people who knew them very well. I suspect there's a distinct possibility that there are parallels, let's put it that way. Do I think they will have the same fate? Yes, I do. I see parallels between Harry and Meghan and another royal couple, Prince and Princess Michael. I know what's happened in their marriage, and I know what the denouement has been. And there are parallels, because Princess Michael and Meghan have a lot in common. And Prince Michael and Harry have a lot in common, except Prince Michael is a very genuinely nice man. And Prince Michael doesn't have a problem with rage. So there are substantial differences between the two princes, shall we say. And Prince Michael would never have done any of the things Harry has done. But it doesn't alter the fact that both wives, in my opinion, married their husbands for what they would gain out of the union. Both of them, at some point, have shown themselves to be very self-serving. Let's not forget Princess Michael's foray with Ward Hunt, and doubtless her desire to make off onto a billionaire's yacht. And if she didn't have the desire, she certainly gave a very convincing rendition of wanting one. Well, when she realised Ward Hunt wasn't a billionaire, thereafter she understood, as indeed did my mother, that sometimes your deal is the best deal in town. So just settle down and moan and groan about it and do what you want, but pretend to the world at large that everything is all right in the Garden of Eden and that you are Eve instead of the snake. I think with a bit of luck, Meghan, if she finds no better scenario to leap to or sail off into, will go the route of Princess Michael. And she will, and Princess Michael, I have to tell you, is a very good professional princess. Meghan has not been a very good professional princess, but Princess Michael can work a room like you wouldn't believe. I remember someone once saying to me, who'd sat beside her at dinner and said, gosh, you know, I'd forgotten and used a word that rhymes with Kent, and said, I'd forgotten what she is, and I actually thought, wow, I really enjoyed myself. And by the end of it all, I really actually liked her until I realised I can't stand her at all. So, Princess Michael has charm, and Princess Michael is genuinely much brighter than Meghan. Meghan may be a very slick operator, but she's not quite as bright as she thinks she is, because she's not taken the time or trouble to learn the rules. She simply thought she'd swan in and create a new game, and in her delusional overconfidence that everybody was just going to bend a knee because she was Meghan, proud, confident, mixed race American actress from a minor, what's it called again? Suits. There are, however, to answer the question without digressing too much, parallels between Harry and the Duke of Windsor, and indeed Prince Michael and the late King George VI, and several other members of the royal family, female as well as male, but we're speaking about the male now. They have been extremely loyal and devoted. You could say they have been hyper attached to their love object. In some of the cases, I suspect that it's been a combination of genuine feeling and duty, because until recently you couldn't get divorced if you were royal. And if you're stuck with somebody for life, it really is infinitely preferable to be able to tell yourself that you have a residue of affection for that person who you once loved, or that you still would be in love with them if things weren't what they are, sort of thing. And you sort of fudge the issue. I think that's a way of accommodating and living with a situation, while on the other hand, your duty means that you have to stay. And of course, the other part is expediency. makes it desirable for them to stay, and so they stay. But then they set out to use somebody, and I suspect that at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter to them that much, because I don't think they ever truly loved the person that they pretended to love. That's my take on it. But where the Duke and Duchess of Windsor are concerned, it's slightly different. She never pretended to love him. She grew to love him. The way you grow to love a tiresome child that is your duty and that you have over the years had a life with and developed affection for. She didn't set out to dupe the Duke of Windsor when he was Prince of Wales. Wallis made it absolutely clear from the word go that she enjoyed his company, enjoyed all the perks of royalty, and that she was there for the ride. She didn't pretend otherwise. Read her autobiography. She makes it quite clear in black and white that she was transfixed by the lure and glamour of the world that she was a part of. Gratis him. He was desperately in love with her. She didn't set out to be anything but the mistress. Meghan set out to be the wife. Meghan set out to be royal. Wallis didn't want to marry David. She wanted to remain married to Ernest Simpson. It was a series of unfortunate happenings that caused the Simpsons to be divorced, chief of which was David, who, to those of you who don't know, I'm sure you all know, was the Duke of Windsor, and before that King Edward VIII, and before that the Prince of Wales. David was the one who had the obsession with marrying her. She didn't want to be his wife, she didn't want to be queen, she didn't want to be Duchess of Lancaster, which was the alternative to being queen. She just wanted to be the royal mistress, happily married to Ernest Simpson. She had respect for the royal system, she had respect for the monarchy, she had respect for the British way of doing things. She didn't try to tear down the monarchy. Nor, indeed, it has to be said, has Princess Michael ever tried to tear down the monarchy or harm the monarchy. Princess Michael has been an exemplary public princess in many ways. So let's give credit where it's due. Meghan is a horse of an entirely different colour. She has done her utmost to damage the family, various members of the family, the relationships within the family, and the British nation, as well as the monarchy's standing, not only in this country, but in the world at large. How long can you pretend to love somebody that you don't love? And I'm not saying that Meghan doesn't love the idea of Harry, but in my opinion, if she really loved Harry, would she be doing any of the things that she has done? Would she be causing trouble when she should be mending fences? Would she be creating havoc when she should be bringing good order into the equation? Should she cause strife when she should be doing the opposite? No. All of this tells me Meghan Markle is in this for what she can get out of it. That she loves and loved the idea of the position, and that this was an opportunity, a new career move, a new step up the ladder to worldwide success and hopefully as domination. But it hasn't worked out like that, has it? Having said that, both she and the Duchess of Windsor were very dominant, and, or I should say, are. Well, it's difficult to do parallels between somebody who's dead and someone who is alive. So just bear with me if I mix up the tenses. The Duke of Windsor was basically a weak man who loved his mummy and wanted a new mummy and got one. That's the same situation with Harry. They're both very devoted. That again, parallels. The Duchess of Windsor was an extremely dominating personality, and so is Meghan. The difference is the Duchess of Windsor was overtly dominating. And David loved it. Meghan plays the simpering, whimpering, sweet, feminine, I'm sweet and weeping little willow. I can't cope with, I'm so sensitive. I can't cope with anything. It all just is too much for me. I'm such a delicate little flower. While at the same time being ruthless and tougher than granite, or as Prince Charles called her, tungsten. That's a significant difference, because Meghan has been able to hook Harry playing not only the dominatrix to his subservient, but this little woman to the big bad man. So she has him coming and going in a way that Wallis didn't. So the Windsor's relationship was far more frank and far more honest, in my view, than the Sussexes' relationship is. And to wrap it up, I will say, the Duchess of Windsor had dignity. The Duchess of Windsor was a lady. The Duchess of Windsor would never have done any of the exhibitionistic things that Meghan has done, although the Duchess of Windsor also had a slightly vulgar exhibitionistic streak in her personality, because the way she dressed was rather too attention-grabbing for her rank. So they do have slight, shall we say, overlaps in terms of a degree of vulgarity. But ladies can be vulgar. And putting that aside, the Duchess of Windsor was not vulgar. She did things impeccably. Meghan doesn't know her way out of a jar. I understand that Meghan's hostessing abilities are right down there with somebody who hasn't even heard of Amy Vanderbilt or Emily Post, much less Una Troubridge, and certainly has never been exposed until it was too late to rub off to what shall we call fine dining. I think it's a ghastly expression, but I gather it's all the vogue nowadays. So let's use it to get the vernacular in. One was basically a woman of some substance and decency, because when the Duchess of Windsor realised that she was stuck with David for the rest of their lives. She set about replacing to the full extent she could what he had given up for her, and she succeeded admirably, while the royal family were doing their utmost to keep them at bay. The Windsors were forced into the situation that the Markles or Harkles or Sussexes, or whatever you want to call them, have embraced and voluntarily created for themselves. These are substantial differences. Another substantial difference is that Edward VIII was a king who gave up a throne for a woman he loved. Harry is a junior prince who gave up his family, his country, his military heritage, his loyalty to his commander-in-chief, his loyalty to his nation, to chase after an adventuress who had ambitions to make it in Hollywood, somewhere she never made it and still hasn't, because she still hasn't made it in Hollywood. And on that note, I will say thank you very much for listening. I hope this has been of some interest to you. If it has, please like, share, subscribe, press the notification bell, and please keep the questions coming in. Remember, this can't be done without you. God bless and goodbye.